As for the format, we'll have about a 50-minute or so discussion, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So please do make sure you send in your questions. We are recording this webinar, and we'll go ahead and send you a link within the next couple of days for you to replay or to share with others if you'd like. And finally, not all strategies and techniques that we discussed here today will be the best option for your organization. Please be sure to check with your IT team or IT partner first before implementing any strategies. Now, I know our audience today includes a mix of Netgain and Affinity clients, as well as some organizations we haven't had a chance to work with yet. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Affinity was acquired by Netgain last year in August. Today, we're a niche IT company that specializes in helping healthcare practices, financial services firms, and law firms lower their IT costs, improve efficiency, and security. We focus on making IT worry-free so that you can focus on your business. And whether you have an entire infrastructure in-house and need a managed service provider, or if you'd like to begin the process of doing away with your on-site network and migrating to the cloud, we can definitely help you. Even if you're already running your network in the cloud and are looking for a better support-driven service provider, we are here to assist and definitely can help you with that. Okay, well, let's go ahead and meet our speaker for today. We're joined today by Bill Sorensen, VP of Strategy, Chief Information Security Officer at Netgain. Bill is a cloud computing and cybersecurity expert with over 20 years of experience in cloud technology, in the cloud technology space. He's created and led cutting-edge technology solutions and teams for decades and continues to speak on cloud computing, optimized firms, and cybersecurity. My name is Angie Moskalenko, Director of Business Development here at Affinity, and will be your host for today's discussion. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bill to start the presentation.
Thanks, Angie. It's great to be here, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to really attend. Today, we're gonna look at kind of the practicalness of trying to stay out of the headlines and really have protections in place and how to mechanically do that through your organization. Today's agenda, we'll talk about the news. We'll take a look at risk management controls that we expect to be in place. Kind of that thought around our employees, your largest risk today. Something called security risk assessments. We'll go back to employees and look at phishing attacks and social engineering. We'll talk about incident response plans, which really are that prep plan of how are we going to handle these things when they happen. Then we'll do some next steps and open up to questions. Please, as you have questions through the presentation, just go ahead and send them in via chat and we'll make sure we've got time for them at the end. Let's look at the news. So the news has been interesting, and every month it's interesting as we see more and more significant attacks, significant breaches happen across the world. Last week, today we've got a mix of accountants, wealth managements, and lawyers on the webinar. Last week, Wolters Kluwer had a significant event where they took all their online systems down for really 3 to about 7 days. It was a US-based event that apparently started in the Netherlands. But the key piece here is it was a significant industry event. Usually we see companies have specific events where that specific service was down. Wolters Kluwer's approach was in the beginning and immediately upon identifying the issue, they took a significant and dramatic effect to bring all their online services down until they could understand how detailed the issue was. In the end, they were able to identify it, isolate it, and then recover from it. But two outcomes from that were significant. One is just the scope of it. The IRS and Treasury came back with extensions on tax filings of an additional week just to reply and kind of respond to the CPAs that were doing taxes in relation to these timings and this outage. So that was significant. Literally, the government responded to try and protect the users of these online applications. The other piece that was significant and that I want to have us think about today was the amount of communication that came out of Wolters Kluwer. Their approach was to put out very small pieces of communication and not immediately. There was frustration in the industry, and many salespeople got called to try and figure out what was going on. But Wolters Kluwer's approach was very, very targeted and very minimalistic in relation to communication to customers and to the industry. We haven't talked to them post this in relation to specifically communication, but that's something that as you're looking at your incident response plan, it's important for you to understand what your scope of communication would be. Excuse me. Would it be the briefest communication? Would it be individual communication to each customer? Would it be just public communication via your website and Twitter? So it's important to take a look at that and understand that going forward. The next thing I want to touch about that's in the news is the dramatic change in the last 12 months from specific states. So we've seen GDPR, and we're almost a year in now with GDPR for Europe. It does impact the United States companies, and so we're seeing a lot of response and acceptance of GDPR as a requirement for our customers. But as you look at what states are individually doing, many of them are taking the almost exact same approach on requirements for us as service providers to customers that hold data that GDPR is. The interesting thing is there's been three different approaches to this. One is a very community approach, and Arizona's program is really focused on that, and that's involvement kind of back and forth with common cybersecurity requirements and pulling businesses into that discussion, creating requirements around personal information that are then shared with the community. There's a bureaucratic approach, which is that second approach. New Jersey has taken that approach, and that's they run the law. The law is the law. They're going to run it. It's very autocratic. It does end up putting a huge amount of power and pressure on businesses in New Jersey. Now, the third piece is this multidisciplinary approach, which is really kind of a blend of both. And we're seeing that in Washington state. And so that's been interesting as well. The reason I bring this up is almost each one of our companies will need to understand what these are, ultimately be able to respond to them and live within that framework. So it's good to get that understanding. Two basic themes here are we need to create an environment of protection for the systems and information that we have. And then secondly, we need to have significant structure around what our response is, kind of that incident response plan. Sometimes we think of these things as technical pieces, but in reality, it's much more of a process that makes things work. We'll deliver this presentation to you as a PDF after the webinar, so some of these links you'll just be able to click on and go read. Next piece I wanted to talk about was American Bar Association's 2017 tech report that talks about how many people, how many organizations have had data breaches. And it's significant. Almost 25% have had them. So people are dealing with this in small and large firms. The smaller firms are the ones that we see being targeted dramatically more, really due to their inability to spend the money and structure around cybersecurity, around training, and those kinds of things. And the people who are doing these attacks really understand that. Large firms, extremely large firms, have the money and structure and infrastructure to really stop most of the direct attacks and technical attacks that happen. We'll talk about these attacks in a little bit, but it's really good to understand that there's really two big pieces here. One is this technical approach, which is how do I get in? Can I get in via brute force? Can I get in via password guessing? Can I get in via these really large sets of computers that they can turn and attack on you? So that's the one piece. The second piece is that human piece. Can I get in via really making someone do something that they normally wouldn't do? So we'll talk about that as well. I list the HHS, Health and Human Services here, and the FTC here as two places that impact most of the people who are on the webinar. We see HIPAA requirements being pushed out to accounting firms and CPAs. We see the FTC involved in regulation around business, and that impacts law firms. And so we really see these governmental bodies moving forward to really try and, on one hand, make everyone safe, and on the other hand, kind of force businesses to do specific things. It's interesting and worthwhile if you're interested in, kind of what you're seeing in the papers, to periodically just go look up, even in Google News, data breach, incident response, cybersecurity hack, and just take a peek at the first maybe 10 or 15 articles that come up. This is so prevalent everywhere in the world that it's almost a normal practice now to have companies on a weekly basis, report a breach, send communications to customers, and take that brunt of the response that causes. Our real goal here is to try and create a defensive position for organizations so that you're not involved in that headline. So let's move forward and really look at risk. So really, this is how we should think about this. Similar to how you think about other risks in your business, risks in your life, there are times where we accept the risk. There are times where we mitigate the risk. There's times where we transfer that risk with insurance or transfer part of that risk. And so as we think about cybersecurity, we really want to focus on our response to different risks. Part of that is understanding where you are today. We'll talk about something called security risk assessments in a little bit. But we really want to, identify those risks, analyze them, come up with actions to say, what are we going to do with them? And then monitor the world to say, has risk changed? And then really put in control pieces so that some of that can be hands-off and taken care of. We see this really being important around a variety of different industries. Specifically, and it's an interesting, and I'll talk about it here just briefly, but this idea of compliance versus risk. And so different organizations have a variety of different compliance requirements and bodies that look at compliance and audit. And then that takes care of a certain level. But there's this other piece that goes beyond that still is additional risks to the business that's important for you to step into and take the next step on, because those items, even though you may be completely in compliance with HIPAA or the SEC OCIE or the IRS, those requirements, we really want that extra protection around data breach incidences. So even though you live within that compliance world, can check that box, we want to protect yourself and your customers from breaches. So let's talk about these controls that help us get to that. The security world really looks at controls as the method that gets put in place to stop things like incidences and stop things like breaches. They organize them into really three main buckets: physical controls, technical controls, and then administrative controls. Physical controls, these are the access to things, access to your buildings, access to physical documents, really access to your computers, the protections you have in place to stop people at the door, make sure you know who they are. We've seen so many even small breaches happen from somebody who looks like the copy repairman and actually isn't. I think last year we did a kind of a mock walkthrough of how would somebody do that, and it's really not that difficult. And so it's important to put things in place to stop those breaches of physical controls. On the technical controls, that's where the computer systems and firewalls and intrusion prevention systems, these technical pieces of equipment and systems that really stop people at the gate. One of the largest technical controls that we've seen dramatically improve everyone's environment is this piece they call multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. And you're seeing it now in almost all the banks. You're seeing it in Google, you're seeing it in other areas. And that's this, your ID, your user ID, your password, and then a second factor beyond that, which many times is a web application that you've got to approve that, or a phone application, you've got to approve that, or it's a key fob or a text message to your phone that you've then got to key back in. They're not foolproof, but in the end, the belief is that you're you and you've got a device that you own. And that's a significant improvement over just ID and password. So that's a huge, huge piece. The administrative controls, and we'll talk to those next, really are around policies and procedures that you've got in place. And here's where we do see compliance come into our world, where they've got very specific requirements around what they want your behavior to be and your employees' behavior to be. And most of those are straightforward and really easy to understand, easy to implement. Some organizations enforce those, some don't enforce those. One interesting comment was a couple years ago at a wealth management presentation I was giving, somebody had just had a fine from the SEC OCIE, and it was related to not following policies. So the story was that they had policies in place. Some of them were wrong. They were actually following some of the wrong policies, and they got dinged for that, but they didn't get fined for that. There was one specific policy that their employees weren't following, and they got fined for not following the policies that they had in place. So that's kind of an interesting piece. Let's continue on with kind of these controls and where the risks are. It's interesting, a few years ago, we always would say employees are the largest risk. They're still a huge risk, and you can argue, are they the largest risk or not? They might be. But what we've seen is the technical capabilities of these organizations that really are stealing billions of dollars from businesses are really, really focused on dramatic amount of technical hacking. They can put together dramatic pictures of your organizations, They look for people's movements as it relates to going on vacation, Facebook posts of pictures, some other communication, and they build organizational charts around your organization. They then use extremely complicated and available technical means to attack. Today, you can buy ransomware as a service. So you can go out on the dark web, hire an organization to run a ransomware campaign for you against someone. They'll create a brand new piece of malware for you. They'll deliver it with dramatic amount of technical acumen. It'll sound and read extremely well, and deliver that ransomware message and then manage the response to that. So those things are available to anyone who's interested in buying them. So it's key to understand that, excuse me, so that you're staying on top of all the technical pieces and protections that you need to have in place. We specifically are looking at here, things like technical patches, updates on your equipment, even your local PCs, making sure that malware protection's updated, virus protection's updated. They're looking for this needle in a haystack, but boy, they've got this huge machine that can find it. And once they find it and they're inside, what we're seeing is the FBI is saying that it's about 6 months before the organization understands that somebody's inside technically and looking at everything. So an interesting thing is, as you go away from today, how do you know someone's not living in your basement? It's a strange thing, but you sure want your technical group to be able to prove that to you without a doubt. So we talked a little bit about this idea of security risk assessments. So that's really an understanding of where am I today? How do I know what my current world looks like? There's very, very formal processes to do these. The goal would be to have an annual security risk assessment. These can cost between $5,000 to $25,000, and their goal is to look at a tremendous amount of control points, all these little pieces. We do some that are small business ones that look at 300 control points, and then normal 50 employee and older one or larger ones that look at 700 control points. And so we have staff that specifically looks at every one of those control points and then documents those and produces this security risk assessment for the organization. The outcome of that is really scoring and an understanding of where you are compared to your competitors, compared to your industry, and really where you should be. The other piece of outcome is a remediation plan, and that lets you understand that here's the items in priority of things you need to take care of. It's important to get senior management involvement in this and make sure that these issues get escalated to the highest level of the organization. We're seeing at least an annual board meeting include a Chief Information Security Officer or Director of Security report that really describes the state of the organization as it relates to risk and security. So take a look at this last one you've done. If you haven't done one, take a look at getting one done and getting ahead of this. Next, I want to touch on the employee side. So we've looked at a little bit of the control side. We've looked at the technical side. The employees are really key in all of this. We're the ones who really are out there trying to serve the customer, trying to serve the staff members within the organization. And as part of that, we're really susceptible to this phishing. Now, years ago, email phishing, which is really getting emails that are asking you to do something you wouldn't normally do. They used to be easy to spot. They used to really understand, try to understand language, and they were coming out of specifically Nigeria for about 5 years, and those were ultimately originally successful and then shut down. But today we see these phishing attacks be extremely coordinated and delivered in methods that are really tough to defend against. The English is, or the language and even the flavor that's related to emails of the person who might be sending it. So your CFO is sending that email and it's really not them. It looks, sounds, and acts just like them. I mean, they're really, really good. And here's where we're seeing organizations put together really attacks that are really well coordinated. What I mean by that is they've got the org chart built of your organization. They know everyone's kind of social interactions in the world online. They're watching for vacations. They're watching for expectant trips. They're watching for people talking about changes that are coming. And then they slide in and take advantage of that. And these aren't small deals. These are huge, huge attacks. Last year, construction company paid the wrong Chinese subcontractor $36 million in a phishing attack. The invoice came in, there was a second follow-up email, looked like it was from the same company with just a little bit different information. They had updated their bank account information, and so would you please make the payment to this other location? Somebody within the typical payable organization, it was a huge amount, it had gotten signed off on appropriately, they made the adjustment and delivered $36 million to the wrong place. Things like that happen and are real things. We just don't want them to happen to you. So as we look at this piece of how do you protect your employees and quite frankly, how do you protect you from your employees, it's really based on training. We work with KnowBe4, one of the largest training and phishing automation organizations out there. They do a great job in driving down your employees' response to phishing attacks. And they do that by systematically phishing them and then training them. And so let's think about adding that to our normal every 6-month training and really try and protect our employees. The worst thing to happen is both for the business and that employee is to have an event where money changes, information's exposed, a breach happens, and both impact to that employee and company can be life-changing. So now we've talked a little bit about the protection side. Let's take a look at you as preparation of an organization. So incident response plans, and this ties into disaster recovery and breach notification as well. But what we're really looking for here is a systematic plan that when incidents happen, you'll follow within your organization to work the process. And this process is really these steps. You prep for this, you detect an incident has happened, you look at it, you analyze it. If it's a breach, in that detection and analysis phase, you identify if it's a breach or an incident. And I'll talk about that in a minute. If it's a breach, the key thing is to contain that, eradicate it, and then do a dramatic amount of discovery to understand the scope of that impact. Post-incident, there's cleanup, there's other protections, there's communication, there's an understanding of how are you going to reply to the state, to HHS, to the FTC, to the other bodies that are interested. And these other bodies are really, really interested in this. Many times there's significant fines. There's almost always audits by everyone who can after a breach and breach notification. There's a little bit of grace there if under 500 people's data has been exposed. Typically what we see happen though is that the exposures are significant because once inside, they're going to grab as much as they can. And much of that happens extremely quickly. So as you look at your incident response plan, and Netgain can help you with that, or usually your compliance body can help you with that. The FINRA's got good examples. I think the ABA has really good examples as well. Look through that plan and then really identify how you're going to respond to each level. We do have a lot of organizations now put kind of security breach response organizations on retainer, so that should an issue happen, you can immediately get access to somebody to come in, an outside set of eyes, both to look at the containment, eradication, and discovery, as well as then help with detection early in that process. So look closely at doing that. The communication piece, some of it can be very straightforward. We see that out of banking. Wells Fargo's incident last year, where there was a significant amount of exposed information. Every Wells Fargo customer got a standard communication piece, fairly benign, but definitely impacted their business. As part of the practicalness of this, I want you to think about your disaster recovery plan. And this is something where we see and have seen that this is a huge gap in organizations, both small and large. You know, can you really survive a disaster? Can you really stop and turn off, or if your computer systems are turned off against you, can you really recover in another place? Historically, larger organizations used to have co-location data centers, computer centers, where they put, you know, old equipment to recover to or partial equipment to recover to. The expense of that has been astronomical to these organizations, and the ability to recover, even in test, even in their annual tests, has been extremely difficult. What we see now is with Microsoft Azure, with AWS, although Azure's got a really good disaster recovery specific tool here, but both platforms deliver a dramatically better experience, and Affinity and Netgain both offer those to customers. In those situations, the customer can call the disaster, or Affinity or Netgain can get to call the disaster, and literally have everything up live and the state it was in just 5 minutes ago in a new place within the hour. So the recovery time is fantastic today. And the cost is really a small cost compared to what it used to be and what the disaster could cause. The last piece on this I'd like to talk about is this idea of practice. And we like this with just tabletop discussions. So you pull together the business folks, you pull together the technical group, a variety of people on the business side, so both operations, attorneys or accountants, the technical group, and then you walk through what would happen if, and use realistic examples, simple examples. Somebody's email ID and password got exposed, and you don't know what somebody had access to. So in that situation, you'd look at all the email history that that person has available to them and suggest that all that got exposed. So you then walk through and say, well, let's look every sent item and what reports, what data would get exposed by someone having access to every sent email that you've sent. those things help then show you what your response would be. On the easy side as well, let's talk about exposures where the copy repair person is looking over someone's shoulder and there's private information exposed on the screen. What do you do in that instance? Is it a big deal? Is it a small deal? Is there a discussion? Is there training? So make these realistic things. It's really worthwhile to practice this. In what we say in the security industry is that it's not about if you'll get hacked or if you'll have a breach. You're going to have one. Statistics say you're going to have one within the next 4 years. And so let's get prepared for that, and let's do the best job possible that we can. So as we kind of start to wrap this up, and then I see some questions have come in, we'll take those questions. Let's go back and talk about the main pieces here. We want you to get that security risk assessment up to date and done. That really is the identification of where you are today, kind of the line in the sand. As part of that, having a third-party technical group come in and take a review, specifically if you're of significant size, of your current environment. We want that validation, number one, that your technical people are doing what they should, but number two, that you're at a protection level that meets what your needs are. Third piece here, take a look at cybersecurity training for your employees. Now at Netgain, we do monthly cybersecurity webinars. A variety are employee focused, and those are free. Those are part of our service. Take a look at KnowBe4, probably take a look at another vendor out there as well, and look at systematic requirements to have your employees trained. We spend a huge amount of money and time on training them in the law practice, training them in the accounting activities. Let's get them trained for protecting themselves and the company. If you don't have an incident response plan, let's get that built and tested, and try and make it a fun thing. It sounds funny, but doing these walkthroughs, these tabletop walkthroughs, can be interesting. Lastly, lever up. Organizations like Netgain and Affinity, when customers move to us and really our IT as a service solution, where we're hosting everything in Microsoft Azure and AWS, we're really uplifting your security profile dramatically. We're stepping in and we're being the people in response to the technical and physical control side, and then we help you with the administration controls as well. I like to leave you as kind of my last discussion with this idea of a cybersecurity checklist for work. Now we do these for individuals almost every other month, so there's one for every month for you as an individual. But for your company or your organization, let's take a look at that SRA timeframe. Let's get that assigned to somebody internally so that they're out looking for getting that done. Let's schedule the incident response plan. Let's schedule that employee training. As things come up, or if you've done these security risk assessments already, let's look at the remediation of the items that have been identified. Put in a quarterly improvement plan, and let's get senior management involved. The worst thing possible is a meeting where no one knows your current situation. An incident happens, looks like it's going to be a breach, and senior management is shocked at the lack of controls that are in place. On the technical side, a quick ask of your technical people for the last report of patches and updates. Where are we today? Just to kind of keep them on task. Angie, I think that's the details for today. Let's take a look at questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. So we do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one, what detection tools do you recommend?
We really like very active malware protection. Whether it's Sophos or other brands, there's really maybe the top three out there for those specific type of local PC protections, server protections. Around the environment itself, intrusion protection systems, they call them IPS, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention are they're very different things, but they're very important pieces to have in place. Intrusion detection, IDS, is really looking at all the traffic that's coming into your world or trying to get into your world, and then determining is it good or bad. It just is a reporting kind of mechanism, and then those reports go to your technical people. Intrusion prevention systems, which are much more active, they are in place to look at all that traffic, make a determination, and throw it away. Actively stop different people from coming in, those types of things. So those are two key pieces. A number of vendors provide that, Juniper, Cisco, Palo Alto, those kinds of technologies are provided. Those are also available in both AWS and Microsoft Azure, and so those are options there as well.
Excellent. Next question, will these slides be made available? Yeah, I can answer that question. Yes, we're going to go ahead and send you a PDF of the PowerPoint and also a link to the webinar that you can view at your leisure. Next question, how important is it to have an external company do our security risk assessment? Can't we just use our internal staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, I kind of want you to put your audit hat on. And so if you know, it's really like auditing yourself. And so what we look at is really having an independent view of the situation. And you may have tremendously strong technical staff and great confidence in them, but there's value to them here too. If things are identified by an outside party, many times that report gets more visibility and more credence than it does coming internally. So even on the technical side, it's good to have happen. So we really think of it more as a third-party audit to come in and take a look. And annually, on an annual basis, it's very worthwhile to have done and refreshed.
Okay, next question. Interesting. We got our assessment back and it has a large number of items with issues. What's the best way to move forward?
Sure. The direct route would be to really prioritize the critical and high items that come back. Really look hard at those and which ones of those would impact the business negatively first. Usually organizations put in what they call a remediation plan that identifies those, schedules those, and just attacks those. Some of them should be immediate. If there's known technical exposures that are out there and your equipment, your servers aren't patched up to date on the security patches, those are real live doors that people can come through that you won't see. So really focusing on those criticals first is important.
Okay. Next question, Bill. How do we understand what we need to do to communicate with our customers when we do have a breach?
You bet. There's good examples out there, and some of the compliance organizations and now the states have specific communication requirements. So it's worth taking a look at both the ABA as well as AICPA, and then OCIE on the wealth management side to look at requirements and examples. Almost all of them have examples now, and so it's worth looking at that. Ultimately, it depends on the level of breach and the information that was exposed. The interesting thing is that exposing someone's address, even though it's publicly available, but you exposed it, ends up being a notification requirement that you would fall on you that you exposed it. So it's worthwhile to take a look at the industry you're in and then get those examples and understanding of what the requirements are.
Okay. Somebody wondering, what's the difference between an incident and a breach, and aren't they the same thing?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I meant to cover that earlier. So think about an incident as something that your employees bubble up to you. Somebody looked over their shoulder and saw something. You want them to report that as an incident. You don't want them to wonder, oh, is that big enough? Is it important enough? Should I talk to somebody about that? That's an incident. Is it a breach? That's a different question. So if that information was exposed in a method that got out of your control, then that definitely would be a breach. So we really want this idea of incidents to happen. Another example is you sent a PDF to a customer and it wasn't encrypted. So you sent, maybe it's a tax return, maybe it's a legal document, and you didn't use the portal, you just emailed it, it didn't go out encrypted. Is that a breach or not? It's an incident, so we want to be able to talk about those.
Okay, looks like the last question that came in, Bill, how important is cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, so today cybersecurity insurance is extremely important. There's 3 or 4 main companies out there. There's Chubb, there's others. You can talk to your business insurance. Folks will have access to those. The key piece with cybersecurity insurance is to really understand what gets delivered when what happens. And so some cover payment for covering notification, some cover payment to cover credit reporting access for people who are exposed. Others look at business continuity and cover business outages and things like that. So it's really important to get an understanding of what your level of insurance need is within your organization, and then get policies that fit that need. At least look at that first base cybersecurity policy that helps you in response to an incident, provides coverage. One thing too to understand is the insurance companies are having more and more requirements placed on you in response to that insurance. So they're going to want to see successful audits. They're going to want to see successful security controls in place. And so you should expect that.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions. Just a couple of last things before we close out today. Stay tuned for information on our June security webinar. We'll be sending registration information to you soon, so just be on the lookout for that. And also, sometimes even the smallest of cybersecurity precautions can make a big difference. So as a thank you for your attendance today, we'd like to offer you a little freebie, a Netgain web cover, so you can better protect yourself against would-be spying hackers. If you're interested, just go ahead and send an email to me. My email is listed on the screen there, and we'll make sure that you receive one. And as mentioned, we'll be emailing a link to the replay of this webinar in a couple of days. And in the meantime, if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, my contact information is showing up on the screen there. And also, we've created a lot of blog and ebook content on cybersecurity topics. So you can always check out our resource center. You can go to the Netgain website listed on the screen, or the Affinity website as well, to check out our Affinity University topics and also our blogs as well. So Bill, thank you very much for this discussion today. It's really interesting and very relevant. And thanks again to everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks so much.